and thank you for joining us. We're here at the Catholic Leadership Conference in Birmingham, Alabama, where, of all people, author Pat Madrid stopped by.
Hey,
great to have you here, of course.
Thank you.
How could you have a Catholic Leadership Conference if Pat Madrid wasn't going to be there?
Oh,
right?
well, I'm sure they could scrape by.
Right. Well, the two books we'll be talking about on this program, On a Mission, Lessons from St. Francis de Sales, and also Envoy for Christ, 25 years as a Catholic apologist. And you don't look a day over 15 years as a Catholic apologist.
Thank you.
So you're doing pretty well. Let's talk about On a Mission, Lessons from St. Francis de Sales.
Okay.
What does he have to teach us today? Why is St. Francis de Sales important to you? And I'm assuming then you believe important to the rest of us.
I think he's got everything to teach us, Doug. He's, to my mind, he's a model for apologetics. And many people today who grew up over the last 20, 25 years with apologetics being something cool, something interesting that you could sink your teeth into, they have the enthusiasm, but they don't necessarily know how to go about defending the faith in a way that doesn't insult people or doesn't push them further away. And he was really a master at that. I'd be happy to give you a description of why I think he's a model for what we're doing. And
yeah, I think one of the things that I've taken away from his reading is similar what I've read Escriva, St. Jose Maria, a very practical, everyday God in your normal workings of your life and how you can lift that up. It's very similar.
Very similar, right. In fact, he was a master of the spiritual life in addition to apologetics. He wrote the classic work, An Introduction to the Devout Life, and every sentence is a priceless bit of wisdom about how to conduct yourself as a good Christian. As for his example, what can he teach us about apologetics? I would say, first of all, he remained calm, and he never allowed the adversaries.
So that's why he's your hero.
He's definitely my hero.
Because you're a calm apologist.
Thanks, I try.
You're the Perry Como of apologists.
Oh, wow.
You're very calm.
Thank you. Well, I really
I'm dating myself there, of course, but
I never heard of Perry Como. That's way before my time. Right? Yeah. I owe him a lot because I studied his demeanor. He was given a very difficult job right after Catholicism became legal again in the Geneva area for about...
So Calvinism,
yes,
was
exactly.
Up against, right.
Calvinism had been entrenched there for the better part of 100 years. Not quite 100 years, but close to it. And the Catholic faith was illegal, and there were virtually no Catholics to be found in that part of eastern France and western Switzerland. And when it became legal again, several priests had gone in to try to missionize the people. They got thrown out, they got beaten up, and it was a dangerous mission field, and he volunteered. 27 years old, he volunteered, and he went in, and he met with the same kind of hostility, the same kind of rebuffs, but he was very persistent, and his calmness won people over little by little. One of the things he did was he used the new media of his day. The printing press had only recently become widely available, so he would write these apologetics tracts, have them printed up by the thousands, and then he would go door to door and slide them under the doors.
Early in the morning.
Right. And in that way, mom and dad are drinking their morning coffee and they're reading these Catholic responses to the arguments against the Catholic faith.
In a non-threatening way where nobody's sitting there saying, what are you doing over there?
Right.
It's funny, when I was reading it, I was thinking that's like EWTN. The idea that people through the internet or TV or radio, in their car or in their home where they're listening to your radio show, whatever, can listen and have some information about the faith without necessarily stepping out yet.
Right. They could be anonymous.
Right, exactly. Call your show or something and ask a question, or just in the car, or when the kids go to bed, sit there and watch TV or something without having somebody say, what are you doing over there?
Exactly.
What are you hanging out at the church for? What are you reading over there?
Yeah, that negative peer pressure could dissuade some people. You're absolutely right about that.
Now, you also say, this is obviously about St. Francis de Sales, but there's a couple other Francis near you allude to. One, our present Holy Father, where he starts off with the line, Paul is a nuisance. I thought that was interesting.
That's kind of grabby, isn't it?
Right. So let us ask the Holy Spirit for his grace of apostolic zeal. Let be Christians with apostolic zeal. And if we annoy people, blessed be the Lord. That's Pope Francis. When he says annoy people, what do you think he means?
I think he means, and of course his statements are subject to interpretation, but I interpret them this way, that he doesn't mean annoy people like be a jerk or be obnoxious. He doesn't mean that, but rather he means, like the old saying goes, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, the people who are complacent, or they have a pharisaical attitude, or maybe they're just not really connected at a heart level with Jesus. It can be annoying when, somebody who is trying to love God and is trying to share the love of God with others is making his presence felt. That can be annoying, and I think that's what he's referring to. Annoying in a good way.
The other one you have here is another Francis, who was a Catholic apologist, and his name was Francis Joseph Sheed, and most of us know him as Frank Sheed.
Another hero of mine.
Catholic Evidence Guild. Now, what is R.G. Bargy common? Well, listen to me, R.G. Bargy common to practitioners of that particular. What is that? Where did you get that phrase from?
It's an Englishism, and you'll find it also in Australia and New Zealand. But what it means is kind of like, getting in there and elbowing people out of the way and kind of bullying your way into a situation. That's R.G. Bargy kind of has that connotation. And apologetics, if it's not carefully done, can be a kind of a self-assertive type of thing, which really destroys the effect of apologetics. We're not trying to assert ourselves. We're not trying to push people out of the way or get them to shut up or any of those things.
Or batter them into agreeing with us because they feel like they don't want to be hit anymore.
Yes,
that kind
does
of thing,
happen too.
But that's not his style. Even though he was there on the street corners in London and with that kind of thing where there was a lot of other argy bargy people, right?
Atheists and communists and all sorts of different isms were represented, and he was a master of debate. He could debate anybody in the public forum, but he did it, and this is what I admire about Frank Sheed so much, is he did it in a way that left the other person not feeling defeated, but making them think, which I think is crucial.
Now, somehow you're relating yourself to an irrigation ditch or a conduit or maybe
this is true.
Maybe a water gutter here, but and a ditch. And you say, Lord, make me a channel of your peace. You made a lot of connections there. That's Madrid? Is that what the word?
Yes, etymologically, the word Madrid, my surname, it goes back into both Old Spanish and Old Arabic, and it literally means an irrigation ditch. And the earlier names for the city of Madrid involved the fact that it was a well-irrigated area. And I like that. I find a lot of resonance there, because to be an irrigation ditch means that I can be lowly, but still serve a good purpose. This is true for all of us.
Right.
So the desire to be humble and at the same time serve other people is really important for apologetics. It's not always accomplished, but I saw in the etymology of my name a lesson for myself.
And also in a sense that way it feeds the roots too, directly, right? In
That's
the
a good
sense
point,
of that, right? You say, what I have learned from these men and from many other men and women like them is that first, you and I can effectively respond to God's call to be a channel of his grace to those around us. And secondly, I've learned that answering this divine call to become an apostle is not reserved for priests and religious. It's for everyone, regardless of background. Though you wrote this book basically mostly about a priest, right?
Yes, Frank Sheed was a layman, of course, but St. Francis de Sales was a priest and a bishop, yes.
Now you say, my goal in this book, therefore, is to share with you what these great men and women of God have taught me about having the heart of an apostle and what it means to be on a mission. What is the heart of an apostle?
Actually, that was my original title for the book. And when I think of this book, I think of that phrase, the heart of an apostle. To have the heart of an apostle means to make yourself available, to make yourself willing to serve other people in a way that might get you out of your comfort zone. In fact, it probably will. And being on a mission, which is the actual title of the book, it conveys the sense that all of us, we're not just here as static beings, doing our job and raising our family. All of that has to be done too, but there's more to it. We're actually going somewhere. We are on a mission, not only personally to get to heaven, but we're also on a mission as apostles. We are sent by the Lord by virtue of our sacrament of baptism to reach out to other people, tell them the truth, help them along too. So it's that sense of forward momentum. We are on a mission I wanted to convey.
Always forward, which he quotes.
Siempre adelante.
Universera, which of course, and of course you even talk about the fact that your knowledge of Spanish, right, from your
it helped.
Background.
Yes.
Did you do a lot of apologetics in dealing with, some of the, Hispanics coming into the United States and the kind of Protestant sects and stuff like that?
I did, Doug. In fact, I have some crazy good memories. Back in the early days when I was at Catholic Answers, I was there for 8 years. And I was handling all of the Spanish language seminars. And so in addition to the ones I was doing in English, I was doing quite a few in Spanish as well. And many times, the dynamic was certainly different in those things. And when I say many times, let's just say
they were somewhat more confrontational in the early days, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Because it was almost like the Catholics hadn't been out there doing this.
Yeah.
And so they were surprised that you even had an argument, right?
Yeah. And they didn't really want you to be out there making the argument. One time, I was speaking at an LA area parish in Spanish. 300 or 400 people were there. And up pops this woman during the middle of my talk, and she announced that she was the wife of the late Alberto Rivera, who, for people who know the Chick comic book tracks, they know the comic book Alberto, allegedly an ex-Jesuit priest who became a fundamentalist Bible minister and was trying to expose the evil, demonic Catholic Church. So she starts debating me. We had totally interrupted my talk. And then a guy pops up next to her and he says, I used to be a bishop in Mexico and now I'm a Bible-believing Christian. So then now I'm debating two of them. So I told the ex-bishop, I said, sit down and I'll debate this lady for now. And when it was all over, I figured I had to do this because if I were to say no, or if I were to say I'll talk to you after, the Catholics in the pew would think, oh, he doesn't have an answer.
Right.
So I just said, okay, the talk is over, we're going to do our debate, which we did. And when it was over, the lady and the ex-bishop and their followers, they just sort of got up in a huff and left. All the Catholics stood and clapped and cheered, and they started singing. And I realized that it wasn't for me, it was they're saying, finally, we're seeing the Catholic faith defended against the kind of people who bully us.
We know it's true, but we
Yes.
may not be in a position, maybe we should be, to really defend it.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people have been trained in some ways to target and
Yes.
ask the questions. It's not just an average person that just happens to have something to say. In the Marks of the True Apostle and talking about St. Francis of Sales, talks about conversions occur not as a result of clever preaching, but because he is a man of deep prayer and trust in the power and mercy of God. He knows God's grace can melt even the hardest hearts.
Yes.
That's something an apologist should remember when he's doing these things.
Oh
right?
gosh, yes. Because the reverse is certainly true, that if we don't pray, if we don't seek the good of the other person for its own sake, then we can actually do more harm than good. We can know all the Bible verses, we can have all the facts of Christian history at our fingertips, but still be obnoxious or pushy, and people will just, they'll go the other direction. I've seen that happen. I've tried to conquer that in myself, but I definitely have seen it happen in other situations. So one of the reasons why I wrote the book was to say, here's some of the things that I learned, but here's some of the problems that are still out there that we need to work on.
Right. You say in addition to having the heart of an apostle, he also has the heart of a shepherd.
Yeah.
And that would be the idea of converting people, but not slaying them either, right?
Yes.
That you're actually supposed to bring the sheep back in one piece.
And defend them. You know, there's a defensive measure there because there are a lot of things that want to attack the flock. So we have to go out like the Good Shepherd and find them. We have to defend them. We have to feed them. Not in a paternalistic way, but in a service way. In other words, we're not looking down on anyone, but we're saying, you know, if I can be of service to you in these ways, that's what I want to do.
Francis doesn't go out of a desire to win arguments. This follows into it. Nor is he interested in accumulating converts as if they were trophies, monuments to his efforts at apologetics and evangelization. That's definitely what you're saying. The other thing he says, and this sounds a little bit like what Carl Keating did and you did, try new methods. Each week he composed a brief apology essay of some aspect, like we talked about. He'd come up with a way, give them underneath the door. Is that what we had to do? I know with Envoy magazine, I remember you had some cute little pieces. You used some different graphics and different styles to maybe raise it up. Try something new, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what Envoy was all about, was trying to appeal to the disinterested, people who had no interest in God, but to catch their attention and say, hey, this is kind of interesting, I want to know more. So we were trying to do that. EWTN, on the radio, the internet, the apps, television, there's so many new ways that we can do this now that didn't exist before.
Right.
And it's really a continuation of what St. Francis de Sales was doing.
You know, a lot of people says, what can we learn from St. Francis de Sales? You know, people say, well, he was a priest, he was trained to do this, what about me, the lay people? And he says, you say, God wants to work through you, regardless of your circumstances, in your office, your home, your social circles, your parish, to search for and rescue those. That was one of your books, wasn't it? Search and Rescue?
Yeah.
And those who have drifted or starting to drift away from the faith. You can reach people in your own daily life. Do you see people realizing that more and are more open to trying to do that these days than they were?
I see some people. There was a time when I didn't realize it, and so I came to see that too. I wish more people saw what I see now. But gradually, one by one, it's a very person-specific work, but I do see it happening. I wish it were happening on a larger scale, though. But that's where maybe this book can serve, you know, and of course, everything that's going on in EWTN and Catholic radio and things, it's all a common effort to try to wake people up to that reality.
Why would I want to picture myself on the Titanic?
Well, because of three things. If we consider what was going on in the Titanic, once the iceberg was hit and the water's coming in, there's no way to save this ship. You have to do three things. Number one is you have to get to the lifeboats. You have to help other people get to the lifeboats. And then there are people who maybe don't get into the lifeboats and they're flailing around in the water. We need to help them get into the lifeboat if they're overboard. And I use that analogy toward the end of the book to say, you know, imagine yourself on the Titanic. So let's just picture that this life and death struggle between good and evil that we're all engaged in, whether we realize it or not, it's kind of like the Titanic. You can be saved. You don't have to go down with the ship because Jesus will save you if you let him. So you got to get to the lifeboat. But you can't just go and say, well, I don't care about anyone else. I want to help the people around me, and then the other people who need help for being in the water.
Right, and that's what we're all called to do.
That's what we're doing, yeah.
And that's on a mission, Lessons from St. Francis de Sales. We also have Envoy for Christ, 25 years as a Catholic apologist. Now, I found this book incredibly interesting. Now you've got kind of an introduction, and most of it's made up of what, articles and things you've written over the years for Envoy or for different publications?
Mostly other publications. I had a whole large catalog of writings that never would see the light of day again because they were in publications that are either now gone or you would never go back 25, 30 years to get an article. They just, they're not there.
They're just not there anymore.
So what I did is I went through and I culled from that large body of articles, I culled kind of a representative sampling of a variety of different subjects. But the first 50 pages of Envoy for Christ is more of a memoir, where I talk about what it was like back then.
Right, it's very interesting, especially
for
by myself, who started to pay attention around 1989 and things like that. And you're talking about the Bible Answer Man, the Catholic Research Institute. And I have to say, not as well as you did, but I certainly learned a lot about Jehovah's Witnesses and what other different Protestant groups taught by listening to those shows.
Yes, as did I.
Though they could be dangerous because they could start to make you doubt Catholicism too if you weren't properly grounded.
You know, and in a way, that's kind of what got me even more interested in apologetics, because I was really enjoying Walter Martin's Bible Answer Man critiques of Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses.
Mitch's old friend, right?
Yes,
Walter
and they were
the John
in fact
Ankerberg
friends.
show, right?
Yes.
You know, they still run that once in a while?
Do they really?
That episode? Yeah.
Heavily expurgated, though.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Heavily expurgated.
Right, exactly.
I don't think they would air it if they showed the full.
Mitch has always said that. And you comment that in the book as well.
Yes,
talk about that situation. Now, the actual foreword then is written by your old comrade there, Carl Keating of Catholic Answers fame.
Old comrade and good friend.
Right. Whenever Patrick Madrid and I meet up, which is not often enough now, that we live half a continent away, we reminisce about our early days together in apologetics. Always we recollect this speaking engagement we had at a Midwestern parish that was named in honor of Our Lady of Fatima. Outside the rectory was a statue of the Virgin Mary at her feet with the statues of 3 kneeling children. As I steered our rental car to the curb, Pat turned to me and said, and you say this a lot, I've heard you use this one before, "What a great religion we have, Carl. Not only can we worship statues, but our statues can worship statues."
Yes, yes. Yeah, I was very proud of myself for coming up with that. Because the 3 statues were kneeling in prayer before the bigger statues.
Right, of course,
so that was
from Our Lady of Fatima.
Right.
Of course, the 3 children.
And it was funny to me, as it was to Carl, because first of all, it's absurd to worship a statue, but the fact that so many people think Catholics do worship statues, that's what made it doubly ironic.
No, I was in a Bible study once at a company, and that's what this man said. Well, they worship. I said, "What are you talking about? I mean, you're an intelligent person,
right?
You know, but he was convinced of it.
Yeah.
Now, was "To Sir with Love" one of your favorite songs, or did you just decide to cop
the line?
For lines taken from Crayons to Publishing?
Yeah, I didn't want perfume in there because I don't wear perfume. So yeah,
there might be some questions that would have been risen.
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you thank someone who has taken you from crayons? I change it to publishing.
Right.
And that really was an ode of thanks to all the many people, my parents all the way down, who really helped me mature as a Christian and come to the point where I could contribute things like this. So it was my thanks to them.
Now, you talk about how I have a kaleidoscope of memories the past 25 years, and one of the things that you're setting the stage for people who maybe weren't around or paying attention back then, that apologetics it was seen in a decidedly negative light back then, kind of reactionary, anti-ecumenical, and thus something to be avoided and discouraged. That may help you understand what a complete wasteland the situation was in the 1980s when the apologists started to make a comeback. Typical parish priest back then was suspicious of apologetics and not inclined to foster it at the parish level.
Yeah.
You began to work when it wasn't cool to be an apologist.
Yeah, well, actually when it was uncool to be an apologist.
Cool. Right, yeah, right.
It wasn't just not cool, it was uncool to be an apologist.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, what happened was after the Second Vatican Council, and coinciding with the council in the 1960s, what had been a staple of seminary formation for decades, for centuries even, apologetics, that became not only passé, but it was actively discouraged as being anti-ecumenical, or as being pre-Vatican II, or being triumphalistic. There were a lot of terms that were used. So you had guys who were going through the seminary in the 60s and 70s, who are now the pastors of parishes in the 80s and 90s, who had been told, this is bad. You don't want to do this because this is anti-ecumenical. So we had to undo.
We want to emphasize how we're similar, not our dissimilarities.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
And apologetics doesn't want to emphasize dissimilarities either, as you know.
Right.
But there are genuine disagreements, and people raise good questions. They are owed a good answer.
Right.
And that's what we had to do, is undo that sense of suspicion. And thanks be to God, especially given the great work of Catholic Radio and EWTN and all the many authors out there, I think that project has largely been successful.
Right, right. It's interesting too, in looking back, you say you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. You know, and we alluded to it a little bit in just talking about the fact that back in the earlier days, it was a little more combative, even for people like yourself who are so mellow, because of the nature of what was going on right now. But so reading back, sometimes you feel like you wish you had taken some things back, right?
Yeah. As I wrote Envoy for Christ, I was going back through a lot of this old stuff that I wrote 25 or more years ago. I started thinking, you know, that's a bit sharp. You know, I wouldn't say it that way now. I wouldn't be quite so pushy as I was. Not that I don't think anything in here is obnoxious, but I just noticed a tone shift.
Right, that you could have.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because in those days it was definitely more of a kind of a combat sport, and people would egg you on.
Right.
And if, you know, they wanted to see the blood.
It was almost like a
figuratively
wrestling
speaking.
match or a boxing match or a fencing match where, you know, each would parry and go back and forth with their arguments and to see who would do better, right?
Yeah, and in a debate setting, when it's handled properly, that can be okay. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But when the apologist starts to play to the audience, I think that's when the danger zone has been reached, because then you're no longer really doing it for God, you're doing it for your own ego. And I noticed that, and I really think that kind of process of maturation, plus, you know, you get older, and that fire of youth tends to burn out anyway.
Right.
And it's a lot less problematic.
And I think you start to realize that sometimes, first of all, sometimes life is more complicated than sometimes we'd like to think it is.
Right.
And second of all, you're not always sure, where is this other person really? Where are they coming from, in the sense of what's their life been like, what's their experiences like? You don't know what they have to overcome to get to where God has given you the grace to get to. Now, were you really Robin to Carl Keating's Batman?
I never had the uniform, but height-wise, I think so.
It worked out that way?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you tell some story, early '89, talk about Mark Brumley from Ignatius Press. You know,
I tell some inside
stories there. There's some good stuff here, And then even the fact, hi, this is Patrick Madrid from Catholic Answers, and I'm calling for Scott Hahn. Is this Mr. Hahn? And you go on to talk about how, so was it your idea to record that talk?
Yes.
Of his?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was at my parish. Well, let's take a step back. I called because our newsletter was given as a gift to Scott Hahn, among many other people. He apparently wasn't getting it because we had the wrong address. Okay. So I had the job that day of making phone calls to get the right address for these nameless people that, you know, I never knew any of them.
Maybe it was getting returned or something like that. And
so I called, you know, hi, is Scott Hahn there? He says, this is Scott Hahn. So I said, I'm with Catholic Answers. Oh, what's that? And I said, so then here I am explaining to Scott what apologetics is and all that. And he says, well, wow, I'm very interested because I just became Catholic a couple of years ago.
Right.
I'd like to know more. So what happened then was that for the next 2 hours, I did very little talking. Scott did a lot of talking. And then I put Carl Keating on the phone with him.
Who didn't want to get on the phone?
Didn't want to get on the phone, no, and I tell that story.
Right.
But for the next 2 hours, those two talked, and then Scott we had him come out and spoke at St. Francis de Sales Parish, of all places.
Okay.
And the talk, which was like the shot heard around the world, the conversion of a
Former Protestant minister, right.
35 people in the audience.
Is that how many were there?
Yes.
Wow.
In a rinky-dink little church hall. No one had ever heard of Scott Hahn. And my pastor was actually very apprehensive, and he told me, he said,
you say, if he says anything wrong.
Yeah, I'm in trouble.
Right.
So Scott got about 5 minutes into his talk. This is the talk that everyone has heard, you know, the conversion story of Scott Hahn. So about 5 minutes into his talk, my pastor, who was sitting in the very front row, I think he was like going to unplug the microphone if he said something wrong. He turns around to me and he gives me a big thumbs up sign. Right. Okay, you're off the hook.
Right, things are okay.
Things are okay.
Yeah. So you've got your early days barnstorming. Mormon missionaries. I mean, you dealt with Jehovah's Witnesses. You dealt with a lot of those things.
I can say, Doug, that I feel very grateful that I've been able to see and experience so many different things. It's been very enriching for me, and I try to convey that sense in the book.
Well, I think you do, and certainly for someone like myself who was kind of on the periphery and watching it while it was going on, and certainly people who maybe are interested today but don't realize some of the history and where things came from and the people who were involved. It's very enlightening. Envoy for Christ, 25 years as a Catholic apologist, and On a Mission, Lessons from St. Francis de Sales, both by Patrick Madrid.
Thank you, Dave.
Another 25 at least.
Let's hope, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you next time. On location at the Catholic Leadership Conference with Patrick Madrid. Check these out, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Join us next time on Bookmark.